My name is Sarah. I used to live with my two sons, but they're both growing up and becoming independent now. The first to leave home was my younger son, George. George proposed to a girl named Angela, whom he met at work, after 3 years of dating. He brought Angela home to introduce her to us. Angela was so excited when she saw our house. It turns out she works in architecture, so seeing a spacious house must have thrilled her. She also mentioned she's currently studying to be an interior decorator. I was interested in that, so I started studying alongside her. At my age, having someone to learn with was a real treat. Then, just a month after George introduced Angela, my elder son, Robert, brought home his girlfriend. Her name is Karen, and she looked about 5 years younger than Robert. Hello, Mel. We are planning to get married within half a year, so please prepare a lot of congratulatory gifts. That was the first thing she said. I tried to keep my cool and listened to her maturely. She kept talking about money and asking about our house. I couldn't help but wonder, is she after our money? However, Robert didn't reprimand her. On the contrary, he emphatically stated, "We're going to get married before George does." I sighed inwardly, thinking, there goes Robert's competitive streak. Robert and George are only a year apart in age, and I don't remember favoring one over the other. However, even though my husband and I tried not to make a difference, the surroundings were different. Since there was money in our house, there were people who tried to get along with Robert from long ago, saying that only Robert, the older brother, would inherit a lot of it. Incredibly, some folks would even belittle his younger brother, George, by comparing him unfavorably to Robert. Hearing this over and over, Robert began to believe that he had to be superior to George because he was the elder brother. As a result, Robert became obsessed with outdoing George in every way. Grades, number of girlfriends, number of friends. While I appreciated his efforts in academics, I and George were bothered by Robert's extreme need to always compare, even in areas where it wasn't necessary. I'm sure this time, George brought Angela as his fiancée, and he thought, I'm the older brother, so we're going to get married soon. He must have brought his lover home in a hurry because he wanted to have an edge over George. When I asked, how long have you two been dating? Karen hesitated a bit and said, about 3 months. Decided to get married in 3 months. I was surprised again at the development that was too early. Do you really want to win over your brother? After Karen left, I had a moment alone with Robert. At that time, I admonished him. Robert, your old habits are showing again. You might want to get married before George, but it doesn't matter who gets married first. But don't you think deciding to marry after just 3 months is a bit hasty? Maybe you should consider living together first. I tried my best to choose my words carefully so as not to upset him, but it seemed he thought I was trying to sabotage his wedding and get Robert married off first. What's the deal? You always favored George over me. You and Dad never treated me like the older brother. By saying he wasn't treated like the elder son, he probably meant that we didn't pamper him just because he was the elder, like everyone else did. To begin with, we never differentiated between them based on their birth order. I never thought about which one is more important. Besides, are you really going to marry Karen, the one who asked for a big gift and showed too much interest in our house on the first meeting? Well, I think Karen is the type that my overly serious mother doesn't like, but she's still the fiancée I chose. Why did you accept George's fiancée so easily and not mine? It's because Angela was polite and respectful. Anyone would be wary of someone who doesn't show basic manners. I thought I was being reasonable, but Robert disagreed and sighed in frustration. You really do favor George over me, he suddenly blurted out, but I'll get married before George. He said, while it's partly my fault as his mother that I couldn't set him straight, I can't change the mindset of a grown man. Once they're adults, there's no obligation for parents to continue looking after them. After all, since they're grown-ups now, I want them to manage on their own without relying on me. Whatever they choose to do, they are responsible for their own actions. I decided to keep quiet and let things unfold naturally. Then, during one weekend while I was studying with Angela, the doorbell rang unexpectedly, and it was Karen who had come to visit. I hadn't received any heads up about her coming over, but despite my surprise, I invited her in. Karen glanced at the study materials spread out on the table and chuckled. Are you two seriously studying at your age? Let me guess, did you both only finish middle school? She remarked without a hint of politeness. And Angela, you're not even married to George yet, right? So, you hang around here hoping for an allowance from your mill. Stunned by Karen's words, Angela quickly shook her head. knowing Angela's character very well, I'm certain she's not here to ask for money. That's why I placed a comforting hand on Angela's shoulder and looked at Karen. Could you please not say such baseless things? Angela and I are here to study. She hasn't asked for, nor have I given her any money. Actually, knowing her, even if I offered, she'd refuse. At my words, Angela nodded her head vigorously in agreement. She's a very sincere and polite person. Unlike Karen, she wouldn't drop by unannounced, insult others, or bring up money matters. I can't help but wonder what Robert saw in Karen to even consider marrying her. Karen seemed to sense that I trusted Angela, and without saying another word, finished her tea and cookies, then left promptly. But that wasn't the end of her unexpected visits. Whenever she knew I was with Angela, she'd come over, mockingly saying how pitiful it was that we had to study. Could it be that, at Robert's instigation, she wanted to put down Angela, who's expected to marry George? If that's the case, by mocking both of us, she's only making herself look bad. Ultimately, I couldn't figure out her real intentions, but I didn't want Angela to be upset anymore. So, we stopped holding our study sessions at my place. We'd meet at karaoke bars to study, occasionally sing songs, or just hang out at coffee shops. However, when Karen realized Angela wasn't coming to my house anymore, she commented, "Finally, the bothersome younger daughter-in-law is gone. By the way, you should leave this house too. Once we get married, Robert and I will live here." Just when I thought she was pleased, she came out with the most absurd statement. She told me to leave the house. Excuse me. This is the first time I'm hearing about you and Robert wanting to live here. You see, mother-in-law, the reason why you have been living comfortably as a parasite in this house until now is because you were loved by father-in-law and taken care of by your first son, Robert, right? But you care for your second son and his wife more than Robert. Isn't it only natural that Robert would throw you out and say he can't take care of you anymore? True, Robert does stay here most of the time, even though he has his own place. He probably finds it easier with me taking care of the house. George, on the other hand, enjoys cooking for himself since moving in with Angela. Because Robert is always at this house, I'm sure she must have thought that Robert took over the house from my husband. And the reason she called me a parasite is probably because she believes that with my husband traveling all over the world, he's raking in the cash, and I'm just living the easy life without working. Don't you get it, Mill? Your husband's probably got tired of you, hence why you're suddenly trying to study and get a job, right? LOL. Even if you try at your age, you won't achieve much anyway. I was fed up with Karen's presumptuous remarks. Trying to explain that I was studying for personal growth and not for work would be a waste of breath. Seeing me silent, she probably thought she hit a nerve and said aggressively, "Don't interfere in our lives except for weddings and funerals." Honestly, I thought to myself that I really didn't want any relationship with Robert if he truly intends to marry this girl in the future. Why should I deal with a young woman who calls me names and labels me a parasite without knowing anything about me? I don't even want to have anything to do with them at weddings or funerals. Well, let's cut ties then. With that, I cut ties with Robert and her. Robert was shocked and exclaimed, "Why the cutting ties?" I replied, "She said not to get involved. If you're curious, why don't you ask her?" And then I blocked all his contact information. Even if my husband is abroad, I can still get in touch with him, so I'll contact him if necessary. I was tired of hearing her nag me every day to leave, so I told my husband about the situation, and we decided to move. Then, half a year after I cut ties with her and Robert, my phone suddenly rang. All of a sudden, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered the phone, it was Karen. "Hey, Mill. Why didn't you attend our wedding? It's ridiculous for the groom's parents not to show up." I was taken aback and blurted out, "Excuse me. When we were supposed to have cut ties, why do I have to attend your wedding?" I asked. "We may have cut ties, but shouldn't you at least attend our wedding?" she muttered. She probably thinks the more guests they have, the more gifts they'll receive. Well, besides the groom's parents, if all other relatives, including his brother, were absent, it'd definitely create an awkward atmosphere. "You did something, didn't you, Mill? Told everyone not to come to our wedding. That's just insane." "Isn't the insane part on your end? Did you decide on your wedding date after seeing the invitation for George and Angela's wedding? Planning a wedding the day before your brother-in-law's is what's truly insane. Trying to overshadow your own brother is just twisted." "Shut up." Robert is the eldest, so he's the one who'll inherit Dad's vast fortune and the house. Everything is superior with Robert, so it's only natural to prioritize him. I sighed deeply. Prioritizing Robert, my husband and I never fought that way. We've always treated both Robert and George equally. If Robert feels otherwise, it's out of our control. And by the way, my husband doesn't have any vast inheritance. But I heard Robert's dad is always traveling around the world and rarely returns to the States. Isn't that a sign he's a rich CEO or something? My husband is a photographer. He earns decently, but not as much as some big CEO. What? So, tough luck. If you married Robert for money, you're out of luck. Though, Robert does work for a reputable company, so you might be set on that front. Karen seemed lost for words, but she quickly snapped back. Humph. Fine. Robert and I have a lovely home without you anyway. Oh, about that house, I've listed it for sale and changed the locks. If you're planning to move in after your wedding, you might want to reconsider. You sold it. Yes, since Robert isn't the owner. There's no way he could live there. Then, give us a house. Even now, please come to our wedding. Let's discuss this properly. Your wedding is in New York City, right? Yes, that's right. We're in Hawaii right now, so we won't make it. By the time we could arrive, your ceremony would be over. Actually, George and Angela's wedding was held in Hawaii. They've always dreamed of a Hawaiian wedding, so we flew in the day before. You'd think Robert and Karen would have known that since they had the invitation. I ended the call as Karen began to cry on the other end and immediately blocked her. It's unbelievable that they'd reach out after cutting ties with us. While we were celebrating George's wedding, Robert and Karen seemed to be fighting back in the States. And 3 months after we returned, Karen showed up at my new place. Hey, Mill, I heard you gave 5 houses to George's wife. Why didn't you give us anything? Well, you called me a parasite and wanted me out, remember? We've cut ties, so we're basically strangers. I don't give anything to strangers. It seems Karen finally realized that the main breadwinner wasn't my globe-trotting photographer husband, but me. She had foolishly severed ties with me, who had an income from properties worth $3 million that I'd inherited or purchased. Now let's reverse the disownment. Let's live together. No, thanks. I've no intention of supporting strangers, I firmly stated. Besides, my uncle and his wife said they'd take you two in. I heard you quit your job thinking Robert had money, and Robert resigned because of some fallout from the wedding, right? Well, if both of you are jobless and you've canceled your apartment lease, they offered to help since they need workers for their farm in Nebraska. Wait, the truck outside must be your pickup. I told them you were there. When I looked towards the front door, someone was approaching, so I quickly opened it. Karen was behind me shouting, "No, I don't want to go. I love city life, but being unemployed, there's no way she can afford to live in an expensive city like New York." Eventually, with her makeup all ruined by tears, Karen was taken away by my aunt and uncle. They were thrilled to have an extra pair of hands around, and both Robert and Karen managed to secure a place to stay. I felt I had done a good thing. By the way, the reason I gave Angela 5 houses was that I believed she'd manage them well. I started by gifting her 5 as a trial. She's considering living together in the future, and I trust we will continue to get along, so I decided to entrust them to her. After a while, Robert called the landline. "Mom, I'm thinking of divorcing Karen. She's terrible at cooking and cleaning, but claims since she does household chores and works, I should respect and give her more money. She even says horrible things like she did me a favor by marrying an older, unambitious guy like me, and that I should support her." He pleaded for help. I'm aware of their situation as I've been in touch with my aunt and uncle. Last month, we learned of Karen's pregnancy, so no one will probably approve of a divorce. You're going to be a father, as a child is on the way. You better step up, I said, and then hung up. Despite their complaints, it seems they're staying together. I've decided to keep my distance from the two of them from now on. They need to take responsibility for their choices and work things out themselves.